What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show, 2018 winner of the Innovation Award by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. As always, I'd like to say, wow, that's a little crazy. I got a lot of things going on here. I got a lot of crazy things going on here.
Wow.
That you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. It is Wednesday night, and I'm very blessed on Wednesday night because I get incredible Black women on. Now, usually at 7 p.m. Eastern time, I have Aisha K. Staggers dropping knowledge bombs on her staggered states of things, where she gives social political commentary on what's going on in the United States of America. And then we get 9 o'clock, we get Black Lady Magic coming on, and we were supposed to be on last week, but there was a platform challenge. Let's put it that way. A platform challenge last week. There's no platform challenge this week. They are back. So welcome back, Dr. Chetachi and Encyclopedia Brown. What's going on?
Hello.
Hey there.
What's up?
Nothing, man. Just living.
Just living. Nothing's going on.
Always something, but busy. Armenians going on. Snow day today. So we've been, cabin fever all day in the house with the kids. Working hard. Hardly working. All the above.
A snow day. What is up, Dre? Thank you for stopping by. What is up, Curtis? And what is up, Sybil? Thanks for stopping by. And also some people dropping on the Periscope platform. Rumor tells me that it's Black History Month. Is it?
Yep. Rumor would be accurate.
That's what I've heard.
Yes. And I was listening to one of Tati's epic conversations last week on Mediascope, and her love for J-Lo and her Motown tribute.
Oh gosh. Oh no.
So I don't. Yeah, we won't go there. Just watch the replay. Tati was right on point with what she had to say about J-Lo's tribute on the Grammys. So let's leave it at that. So let's get more serious though. Our conversation topic tonight is a great one, and Encyclopedia Brown brought it up, saying thoughts on how to incorporate Black history and Black contributions into the broader educational curriculum. Now, this is a great perspective because Dr. Chetachi is an educator in the university college area, and Aliyah has children in the educational system, and she's been involved with educational systems around the world. So, Aliyah, why'd you want to kick off on this conversation topic tonight?
Well, for a variety of reasons, but the main one just being that, of course, whenever we're in Black History Month, it always makes me stop and reflect about, why we have, this designated month to look at the contributions of African Americans. And it's always a time for me to kind of reflect and look at my own life, my own education, and my own background with the eyes of how can I improve upon that for my own children. And one thing that was glaringly absent from my education at the primary and secondary levels was information about the contributions of Black people or anybody of color, other Americans, to America. Basically, all that I learned about in school at the time was basically slavery, the Emancipation Proclamation, the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln, and then later Martin Luther King, and that's about it. And to me, while those things are important, and of course we need to know about them, it's only a small fraction of all of the contributions that African Americans have made, not only to American history, but also to global history. And so in my view, Black history is American history, and it should be taught not just confined or relegated to that 1 month, but throughout the year as part of the regular curriculum, because I felt like if I hadn't actively and proactively gone out and tried to seek out this information for myself, I would still be very ignorant as to the contributions that African Americans have made to broader society. And I'm talking beyond the things that people do acknowledge through cultural appropriation, like our style, fashion, swagger, language, music, everything that we do. But I'm saying even, that's, people know and acknowledge that because they copy it. So, supposedly copying is the highest form of flattery, right? But I'm saying beyond that, like I wanted to know about Black inventions, Black innovation, Blacks in, quote unquote, normal fields of work, because the likelihood of anyone becoming a famous athlete or a movie star is slim to none. So I'm looking at people who go into what I call, quote unquote, real professions, teachers, lawyers, doctors, policemen, diplomats, whatever. I wanted to know about those people because I felt like that is more likely going to be my future, and it is more likely going to be the future of all of our children. So that's kind of what's been on my mind as a mom and just a person of color during this month of reflection as to why is it only relegated to this 1 month. And that was it.
No problem. Tachi, opening comments.
I think that if you are not doing an adequate job of incorporating Black history into the broader scope of American history, your history is incomplete. Picture taking an entire segment of history out. I mean, there's a play called A Day of Absence, which kind of explores what would happen if there were no Black people. Picture a day of absence in terms of not having Black contributions to American history. I mean, forget it. You always hear about the inventions about, okay, well, you wouldn't be able to drive or stop because there'd be no stoplight. You wouldn't be able to do this or do that or do that. So you're really looking at an incomplete depiction of history when you don't recognize Black history. That said, I'm a big one for saying I'm Black 365 days a year. I refuse to relegate my Blackness to February, the shortest month of the year. So I think what needs to be done is we are in this mindset, and I'm not just talking about broader society, it's also Black people too. Will pull out your dashiki for February and then pack it up with your mothballs till next February. You're Black all year long. You're part of the American landscape all year long, and we need to do that. I mean, and those are my openings. I guess we'll get into how and what and why as we talk.
It's interesting. I had a conversation with a Black woman about 2 weeks ago, and she went into her child's public school and she asked this question: "So, what are you doing for Black History Month?" Said, "Oh, well, we have someone reading some African stories in the library once this month, and that was it." So she put herself out there to do something for Black History Month. Now, Leah, you said at the beginning of the conversation how much or how little history you had taught, Black history you had taught when you were growing up. Tachi, how much Black history did you have exposure to when you were growing up?
Gee, let's see. I grew up where I was one of few Black people and even one of fewer Africans. That was not something that was hinted upon. I had one Black teacher in high school. So I think the entire from elementary school all the way to high school, I think I had one Black teacher that was in high school, and she happened to teach history. So that was interesting. But yeah, scarce to none, especially at the time where there wasn't this, and there's still not that huge spirit of inclusion, but it was, really not talked about like in the 80s and 90s at all. So very slim to none. My education had to come because I had woke parents, and then being African, it was critically important to understand your history and where you come from, and that your history does not start with slavery, regardless of what end of the melanated spectrum you come from. So yeah, none.
Okay. Leah, take a look at how much Black history you were exposed to when you were growing up compared to what your children are now. Less, more, the same?
I would say that it is night and day different for them in the sense that they are getting it a lot. And because I am their mother, they're getting it all the time. So just like what Tachi said, it's not just about February, even though February is an awesome month because a certain person's birthday is in February. But it's because...
Are you February?
I am.
So am I.
Are you too?
February 4th.
11.
Oh my God. Happy belated, Tachi.
Thank you. And happy belated. Happy belated, Leah.
You.
Wow.
No, it's an awesome month because two people in this room right now are born in February. But anyway, I digress. The point is, with my kids, yes, they are getting way more than I did because number one, like Tachi, my experiences in my early childhood were that I was the only person of color. I wasn't one of even a few. I was it. There was nobody else. Even in my own family, because as I've said in many of our other talks, I'm biracial. And I grew up with my white maternal mother's family. So even my own family was not really in a position to educate me about Black history from their own experience. They did try for my sake. My mother was really good about making sure that I had books that had characters that looked like me, that I had dolls that looked like me in the skin tone, that I had the opportunity to see other children like me as often as she could make those opportunities available. But in terms of being able to teach me from her experience, obviously she couldn't do that. So for me, knowing that, I've done things differently with my own kids. And unlike my own experience, my kids look like me. They can ask me questions, and there's a sense of natural comfort there if they do have any questions of identity or race. They've been living most of their young lives overseas, so they still are a minority in the sense of they are maybe the only African Americans at the school, but there are other Africans. There are other African diaspora folks there. So, we've had some Latinos or Blasians also in these schools. So the contingent of folks with, Black roots have been greater than I experienced growing up. And at the school that my children are currently attending, since we're in the United States right now, was the first school in the state of Virginia to integrate. So there is already a premium placed on of really living diversity. Instead of just talking about it, they are about it. They do it. And so there's people of all different socioeconomic walks of life, but there are also kids of color there. There's not just Black kids there, there's everybody. So white kids are still the majority, but we're talking about like maybe a 55-45 breakdown in terms of percentage. So my kids just feel like they can be themselves. And that's anything that I think that's what any parent would wish for their children, is that they're not so different, that they're always aware of their otherness, that they're comfortable in their own skin, and they also don't feel like they have to educate everybody else about who they are, because everyone at that school is educated about the contributions and value that African Americans bring. There is a Black Parents Association at the school that is separate from the parent teacher, or the parent school board, or whatever it's called, PTA. It's a separate board. It's the Parents of African American Students group. And they're constantly doing programming throughout the year. Of course, they ratchet up the amount of programming that they do during Black History Month, but it's constant and it's open to all of the school. Because the other thing that I see happening, and while part of me likes it, part of me doesn't like it, is when we do a lot of these Black History Month programs, it really is seen by, I think, broader society as programs that are just for us, for ourselves. So it's like we cater to our own community. And I think others who, even if they might be genuinely interested or sincerely want to learn, feel a little uncomfortable about going because they feel like they might be intruding. But at this school, they really made they've done a good job of making people know that it's for everyone. And I really like that for my kids. And I think that they're much more aware of their Blackness, what it means. They're proud of it. They know that they're beautiful. They know that they're important. They know that nobody is better than them. And those are messages that I've been making sure that they hear.
Excellent. I just want to, before we go further, want to shout out to Herbie. What is up, Herbie? Thanks for sharing the link on Periscope. Also to Serena Wills for sharing the link out on Twitter and Instagram. And greetings to Luke also.
Hey, the school from Return of the Titans is actually not far from where I live. I drive almost daily past it when I pick my kids up because their school is in the same kind of vicinity as that school.
Interesting.
Yeah, and every time we drive by, I actually think of the movie because I'm like, that's the only connection I have to that school. Otherwise, it's like, it doesn't mean anything to me because it's also a high school. My kids are in elementary. But I just thought that was interesting that they brought that up in the chat.
Nice. And if anyone would like to jump in, don't be afraid.
Don't be shy.
Yeah, there's a seat for you.
Don't be shy. So Tachi, one of the things that Encyclopedia Brown said was copy is the honest form of flattery. But is it really good? Because copying is good, but not copying in a positive way cannot be good. Like just copying for copying's sake is not a good thing.
And appropriation isn't good. So let me just be clear on that.
Well, that's
absolutely. What usually happens is when there's copying done from certain communities, there is not the credit given to those communities for creating this original, whether it's an art piece, a style of dance, clothing, whatever the case may be. B, this new community then commodifies it, appropriates it, and then commodifies it, and it becomes McDonaldized culture. A huge example of that is, remember the whole thing with the Harlem Shake? So
Yep.
I look when they were like the Harlem Shake challenge. I mean, even the university that I was teaching at the time, they did this Harlem Shake thing on social media. And I said, you all do know that this is not the Harlem Shake, right? So
Exactly.
the original Harlem Shake had come out like years and years before.
In the early aughts.
Yes. Exactly. And what they decided to do was come up with this thing they called the Harlem Shake. Well, Melissa Harris Perry showed them, and what she did on her show is she got a bunch of dancers from Harlem to show what the Harlem Shake was like. But the unfortunate thing is you don't always have a Melissa Harris Perry around to shed light on what the real thing is. So often these things go into obscurity without credit given to the original creators. And that's almost like it is like stealing the voices of people whose voices are so underrepresented anyway. So the one thing that they have, and this is, please don't think that I'm saying that you should not feel free to participate in the culture. Absolutely. I mean, even now, when you look at, okay, the popular thing now is Afrobeat. Okay, so Nigerian dance is hot, Nigerian music is hot, and especially in Europe, you see a lot of people that are not necessarily African and not necessarily Black participating in the fever that is Afrobeat. And I think that's wonderful because I think it's a way to celebrate and for people who would not be familiar with Nigerian culture or Black culture anyway to participate. What I don't abide by is you taking it and then trying to make money off of it, because then that's like stealing the voices of these people.
I want to get into an interesting direction here. This subject, Leah, how much do we have to say that Black people haven't been making this an important issue? Like, have they been pushing hard enough or enough to make this a more important issue? I see your lips puckering.
It's because
up
I'm
here,
thinking
so
immediately, like I have 1,000 thoughts going on, like I always do. I
Go
would say that I do think that there are certain segments within, Black culture that is vocalizing this demand and actually doing something about it. They're writing articles about it. They're reaching out to, the Department of Education on all levels, from federal, state, down to local levels. But I still feel like, and I've said this in other conversations, and it applies here, that really we won't see any real kind of change until we do it at a foundational level, and where we are able to kind of come around and do it with one voice and bring the whole force of the majority of our community to the issue. I think the problem that we have now is that we're too stratified and we are too caught up in our daily lives, and there's too much going on and people are overwhelmed with life. Especially right now in the United States, I think a lot of us are just daily. Well, thank you, Keenan. I appreciate that. I take that as a compliment. I feel like daily, and I've been told that before, but thank you. So I guess it still applies.
Wow.
Yay, that makes me feel great.
I actually met that lady.
Oh, really? That's another
Wow.
conversation.
Wow.
We should have the conversation. I think this is the topics we should put a pin in it, of why is every Black person that you know always told by somebody else who you look like some famous Black person? You know what I mean? Like someone always has to be like liken you to someone who they know, instead of just complimenting you like, oh, you look like this person or that person.
Well, because
I guess that's the way I'm trying to relate, but I'm just like, I'm tired of it. I just look like me.
No, well, you know what? Be quiet. you sit down and be quiet. Who else but to no? But I think not to interrupt you, but I think that's how people relate. Sometimes that's how people relate to, whether it's sad or not. That's how people relate to Black people, because you may not know other Black people in your life or anybody else in your life. And I'm not saying that's the case here, but you may not know anybody else in your life. So the Black people you see and relate to are on television or are in sports, that type of thing. So, but that's really a testament to the way society works, that's an issue. So
it's true. It's true. Anyway, but going back to the point of what I was trying to make, and I agree with Tachi. It's just funny because I feel like I've been told I look like a lot of people that I look nothing like. So, I mean, I guess, like you said, it's just who they can relate with because that's all they know. But I just find it funny. So I do feel like there are certain segments of, Black culture that are working on that. But I think until we speak with one voice or with a larger amount of us to say that this should be expanded beyond the confines of 1 month, it's not going to happen. Plus, we need to have allies. We need to have institutions that agree with us. And I think where it really needs to go to is at a fundamental basic educational level, where the existing curriculums and the existing pedagogy that's used to teach our children are incorporating this information. And this body of knowledge is out there. That's where I feel like Black people may need to do more of their advocacy, is to say, okay, we have this evidence of all of these things that Black people have done and all the things that they've contributed to American society and the world. Why is this not being taught, and in what ways can it be taught? Because the area where I kind of always struggle with is, why does it always have to come from Black people? Why do we always have to be the ones to do anything? I'll give an example of what I mean. I'm not saying we shouldn't, because I mean, if we want it, then we obviously have to do something about it. But I also feel like, why does it always have to come from us? Why isn't this a larger societal value? That's my concern. But the example I'll give is, as you all know by now, my day job is that I work as a diplomat. So in my first few tours overseas, when it got to be Black History Month, usually it was just me, or maybe me and one or two other African Americans working at the embassy. The embassy community would look at us and be like, well, what are you guys doing for Black History Month? Like, somehow, because it's Black History Month and we're Black, it's our responsibility to do a program. Most of us take the mantle on and we do something about it because we want, of course, to represent Black History Month, and we're using it as an opportunity to not only show our culture and the contributions of African Americans, but because we know nobody else will do it. But I'm like, if we weren't there, would they have done anything? The answer is no. The second example I'll give, and then I'll pass it off to you two, is I have a colleague who used to work in the Foreign Service with me, who left a few years ago, and she works now for a prominent consulting firm, foreign policy consulting firm here in DC. She's been there for about 3 years, and she discovered in her second year that there was literally no programming in her firm for Black History Month. And this is a firm that prides itself on being in touch with, culture, with people, with values, not only in the United States, but across, the globe. And because she noticed this absence, she took it upon herself to go to HR and say, hey, we need to have this program. And she put it together. And now for the second year this year, they've had a programming, but it came from her initiative and her observation that there was no recognition of Black History Month and therefore no programming. And it was bothersome to me because this is the firm that she works for, and I'm not going to say no names, is a firm that I think would have known better, considering the people who I know are there, who established it, who work there. And so if they're not even able to recognize this at their level with their worldview, and the type of people who I know work there, then the expectation for me is really low that firms of lesser caliber or other institutions are doing anything either, unless it comes from us. So I'll leave it there.
Dr.
Because that's a lot.
There you go. She's on fire.
Okay, I didn't hear you. I was like, it's okay.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
It's okay. It's okay.
Can we go back? Can you restate your question so that?
Well, one of the things I get concerned about is that are Blacks doing enough on their own with education? Because if the intent here based on this conversation is making it more part of the broader educational curriculum, are Blacks doing enough or have enough of a foundation to push this to the broader educational curriculum?
So the simple answer is no, but it's a multifaceted no. As you know, you just mentioned platform. Do we have the power in the platform? So if we're talking about K through 12 educational system, this is not college, like, okay, where I am, where there are, it works differently. In K through 12, there are a set of ascribed things and core competencies that they have to learn, or they deem important as learning. And part of that is not African American history, okay, or African history, or for that matter, history of Alana people, and that's that acronym for people of color. That's not something that is not even necessarily deemed important, but they don't give the time to, because there is such an emphasis on testing and teaching to the test that everything else falls by the wayside. So if they're not giving credence to things like art and music, you damn for sure know they're not going to include African American history in this. And so then again, yet again, it falls on the shoulders of African American parents to educate. However, simply because you're African American doesn't mean that you understand your history or are woke. And so it's almost the blind leading the blind in that case. So we really do need central institutions that are going to teach and teach it the right way. So, I mean, there's a lot to that. So a simple answer is no. I don't think Black people are doing enough, but on the other hand, are they in the positions of power to really enact those types of changes out? Things are being done. So I used to actually, when I was in college, I volunteered at an Afrocentric or African-centered elementary school called Nile Valley Shule. And so that was part of it. But how many Nile Valley Shules are there? Okay. Very few. There are some charter schools that do that type of thing, but most of that type of education comes from outside the K through 12 educational system, and it falls on the shoulders. And Dr. Vibe is gone, so we're going to keep going.
I was like, just keep going like
we're going to keep going. So it falls on the shoulders. It's on the shoulders of Black parents and Black groups to educate in this type of way. So do I have an answer as to how to solve that? Kind of, but not really, because it's a larger problem that I don't think is easily solved. But it's a start. So again, I always point to the fact that both Leah and I are members of Delta Sigma Theta. When you look at the Divine Nine, and not just the Divine Nine, but many Black groups, they're doing a lot of things to try and educate those types of things. We have in Delta Sigma Theta, we have the Dr. Betty Shabazz Delta Academy, which is dedicated to cultivating young girls in STEM, math, science, etc. And so often what happens is those programs, you're learning about Black women who were instrumental in STEM, Black men who were instrumental in STEM, in the math and the sciences, etc. So, these types of groups are doing things to try and do that. What needs to happen maybe then is partnerships between these types of groups and the school system, because Lord knows there's enough of us that are teachers to get it done.
Okay, well, before we go any further, just a few things. I want to shout out to Gabe, shout out to Luke, shout out to Keenan. Dre, who's an educator in the New York City area, says, I get around it. That's all. I get around it. There are skills that they need to do at the elementary level. I'll keep on comments coming. I can't read here. Here we go. My students are given non-fiction literature that are based on the history of people with the ancestry from Africa. My students don't see Black history because I teach it all year round. Mm-hmm. Wow, these comments come in so fast. I'm losing.
It does.
I am granted. I am at an level of autonomy as long as the students are able to develop the skills stated in the core standards. Bringing this point up too, Leah and Tachi, where you live, how many Afrocentric schools are there?
I mean, it's hard for me to put my finger on it because I haven't really looked anywhere, only because the school that my kids go to is the one that I really, really like. So once I found that school, I didn't need to look any further. But I would say in this area, in the DC metro area, I find that a lot of my friends who have Black or multiracial children, if they're in DC, they either try to get them into schools that have some sort of international flavor or more of a diverse cultural flavor or some sort of a STEM thing where there's a theme, or they end up sending their kids to private school. Because certain public schools, it's like anywhere. I'm not going to say it's only, unique to the DMV because it isn't. But it's like anywhere. If you can afford to live in the area where the good schools are, then you're going to get the kind of education that you want for your kids. And that includes the cultural enrichment. If you're not as fortunate as others financially to be able to afford to live in those districts, then you're going to be sent to whatever the local school is. And either you're going to find yourself in a situation where the school is subpar, or there's a lack of that cultural enrichment. But I would say that there are certain schools here that are catered to specifically promoting African American culture, embracing it. There's some KIPP schools here. Some of the schools that you've seen sort of online, like I think it's in Atlanta. I don't know the name of it right now, but there's a charter school where they're constantly like all over social media. They go viral with their things that they do to uplift and empower the kids. And it's so Black. Like it makes me just feel joy to look at those videos, because you see how comfortable those kids are, and they're kind of like reveling in their own culture. And at the same time, their academics are off the hook. All of those kids end up graduating. They all defy the odds, knowing where a lot of those kids come from. That wasn't meant for them. That wasn't supposed to be their destiny, but someone found a model that works for them. And so I look to schools like that to be like, how can we replicate that magic, in a way that is appropriate in DC, in Boston, in New York, in LA, in every area where we have a higher concentration of Black kids. I feel like something like that is catered to them is really going to be successful for them to defy these odds and to live up to their potential instead of just being a statistic. But I think that in a place like the DMV, there are some, but definitely not the number that you would expect to have in such a large metro area.
Tachi, in the area that you live in, how many? Oops.
Oh my gosh.
How many? Yeah, I'm having a fun night tonight. How many?
Camera likes to move on its own.
How many Afrocentric schools do you have?
I couldn't tell you.
There you go.
Because I really don't know. Now that doesn't mean none, but none that I am aware. I'm not aware of. I know there are programs, and I think this is one of the things that we need to look at. There are programs, just sort of like what I was talking about before. But as far as schools, I'm not really sure how many there are. I do want to add something on that. Sometimes we can't rely on it should be there, but we can't always rely on a school system to do what the hell they're supposed to do, because we know they're not, whether because of budgetary constraints or just plain not wanting to do it. And so what I know, when I was in high school, there was a program, State University of New York at Buffalo has a program called, SUNY Buffalo has a program called STEP, the Science and Technology Enrichment Program. And that was specific. And in fact, I think that program was replicated at a lot of SUNYs around New York State. And so it gets state money to be able, and funding to be able to do this. And so what it is for children from 7th grade all the way through senior year in high school. And it is to cultivate, even though I'm not in like the sciences, is to cultivate your interest in the sciences and technology, but regardless of whatever you want to do. And so we had classes after school. You would go there. So you finish at 2:00 or whatever, then you go there. And then you had 2 other classes. So it would either be to help with whatever it is you did already, like whether it was math for us. Leah, I know you went to school in New York State, so you know course 1, course 2, course 3, right? So the Regents courses to help with that. And then there was another course that was for your information. So I took Blacks in Science. So they had all of these different courses that were talking about contributions of Black people to these different fields. I took an architecture class. So it was an architecture class, but then we were looking at Black architects, etc. So I think that we can't wait for school systems to do again what the hell they're supposed to do. So the good thing is that New York State, or the state universities, had these programs. So we need to put, and when I talked about this with one of my colleagues at the university I used to work at, she was, and she was a non-melanated woman. She was excited. She said, well, we should do that here. We should see if we can get some funding to do that here. So it's a program that's totally replicable across universities. So things like that could work as well.
Another thing I wanted to just add quickly to Dr. Vibe, I don't want to take your train of thought, but it just occurred to me when Tachi was talking. Another trend that I've been seeing is a lot more parents, and parents of color specifically, are choosing to homeschool their kids. So
I
just wanted to put that out there, because I know that that's happening, and they're doing a lot more of that cultural piece on their own, because they value that as parents, and so that's what they're giving to their children.
That's an interesting point, because that's a very fast growing sector, especially in America with Black Americans.
Yes.
Is the amount of homeschooling that's happening. I just wanted to bring in my perspective, since I live in Toronto. aka supposedly a world-class city, there is only one Afrocentric school in Toronto.
Wow.
One. That's it. So
Mm.
I have a
Well, that's telling. That's
go
telling.
ahead. Go ahead.
It's telling, but I have a question. Could it be because, okay, when we look at and I'm not Canadian, just because I grew up on the Canadian border doesn't mean I'm Canadian. But could it be because the Black populations in Canada are not necessarily, they're Afro-Canadian, but they're not coming from generations of being in Canada the way that African Americans are generations of being in this country. So there are obviously a lot from the Caribbean, a lot from Africa. Do you think it has anything to do with that or not really?
I think it does, and I think it leads to a whole other conversation that I think we have to do on a Wednesday night. I'm of the thought process that when we say Black community, I don't think of Black. I think there's a lot of Black silos.
Correct.
Absolutely.
So for what you're saying, I agree that especially in Canada with its diversity, we have Blacks from the West Indies, we have Blacks from Africa, we have Blacks from America, we have Blacks who have many generations in Canada. So all those areas come up, and when Leah was saying about sending kids to private schools, I have a funny feeling in those private schools, depending who's running them, there's very little, if any, Black history education in those schools. Maybe I'm wrong.
I really think, again, it depends on the school. What is their vision? What's their mantra? What is their belief system? And a lot of it stems from that. Like Tachi was saying, the program, that STEP program that she participated in, obviously valued science and technology and engineering, and making kids who may not get as much exposure to those fields to have that opportunity. The school that my children go to is more, of course, it's academically challenging, but it's more about educating the whole person. So there is a value there on educating the kids culturally and learning tolerance and learning acceptance and learning how to deal with difference and learning that there's actually more in common than there is different. And how do you navigate in a world that sees you a certain way based on these things that are really not important, as secondary. And so, I mean, it really goes back to, the value system of the individual school, and then parents will likely choose a value system that most, echoes their own. And I agree with you, though, Dr. Tachi, that a lot of what we're seeing today, and I think the reason why we can't speak with one voice, or maybe why this isn't a priority for us as a community, a larger community, is that we are so divided. We're no different in that than any other culture. We're the same as everyone else. Like, I really can't get past this idea, like, we're not a monolith. We have never been. The difference is now we can't seem to pull together the way we used to in the past around issues that we felt were important, like getting our voting rights, being, civil rights, equal treatment, things like that. It was easier for people to convalesce around those issues because it did have a broad brush that affected everyone. Whereas now with education, yes, it's a value that we all have, but there's such a wide variety of options. People can generally find a best fit for their families. And so they have to pick their battles. And even though I think in an ideal world, we would want a school that is Afrocentric, that does teach our children more about themselves culturally, that does teach them about the contributions of African Americans and how those are actually American contributions to the world and the country. But at the end of the day, we're all spread so thin that people have to just survive. And even though I think that is something that people care about, it's going to be one of those things that's of lesser importance if it's a difference between, does my kid get an education at all or not? Or am I going to hold out and try to, stake my claim until this school is fixed and does these things that I want them to do? And, what leverage do you have as a parent? Really none. By law, if you don't take your kids to school, you're in trouble.
May I add something? Go ahead.
Before I go quick.
I love when I make you both want to talk.
Just a quick.
I've done my job then.
A quick shout out to people like Natalie Crew on Periscope. I don't know if she's here on Get Vocal, but Natalie, the troublemaker, she says Dr. Vibe needs to take down his camera. I feel you, Natalie. I feel you with that. And also Roger Dundas, him and his wonderful wife, Camille Dundas, they run Canada's biggest online Black Canadian website, most viewed, called buyblacks.com. Please check it out. Also, he has put a link in the chat section about what mainstream thinks about Afrocentric schools in the Toronto area. So if you click on that, you can definitely see what's going on here in Toronto. Just wanted to catch up with us, shouting out to everybody. And one other quick thing, U4Sight says on Periscope, I know someone personally that took her kids out of one school district to another one to get them educated about Black history.
See?
Tachi?
So, A, is Dundas spelled like Dundas the street in Toronto?
Dundas. Dundas.
Dundas. Okay. All right. And then that just thought about it. And then I here's the thing. You brought up an interesting point when you talk about several Black silos, because what happens is when, in this country anyway, when we talk about Black history and things like that, obviously Black American history is very important because that's part of American history. But then we're also falling into the trap of not recognizing other histories. For example, I am not African American. I'm African American because I'm an African that was born in America. My parents are Africans. But what happens is I don't see that history reflected there. You don't learn a damn thing about Africa or okay, when we talk about it, the Afrocentrism part of it, there is a push, obviously, Afrocentrism. If you look at Malefia Sante, who wrote the Afrocentric Idea and Afrocentricity, it's not, just about keeping Africa at the center. It's about looking at the world through the eyes of an African. But what ends up happening often with people who claim to be Afrocentric, and sometimes I call them the Hoteps. So what ends up happening is that they look at a romanticized Africa of ancient Africa, not realizing that there is an Africa now that you need to be teaching. And so it's one thing when you're teaching history, but when you're teaching about Africa and you're teaching from a romanticized point of view, because you don't want to talk about the wars, you don't want to talk about but that's not all Africa is. And so this is kind of where I have a problem with Afrocentric education, because it is not complete. I'm not saying that you have to cover every single country in Africa, that you need to cover every single country in Europe in terms of the Afro-European experience, the Afro-Caribbean, but it needs to be there, because guess what? We all exist in America. So the fact that I open a book and I see nothing about my history almost like erases me, because I'm not really African American. So where do I fit? So I think that's something we need to look at too.
Okay. Encyclopedia Brown, continue.
Okay. I was going to say that, I agree with Tachi too. And I think that's part of the thing that makes it so difficult to actually find a starting point to make sure that these histories are included is exactly what Tachi said, this stratification, because what story do you tell? So when we talk about Black history, most people think we're talking about African American history, but what is the definition of an African American? Is it only the African Americans that were brought here through the slave trade and then, made roots and have been here for generations since? Or does it also include, and it does in my view, as Tachi said, other people of the African diaspora who have made their lives in the United States, either immigrated here or are first gens, who are, the product of parents who immigrated and then they themselves were born in America? Those stories are equally valid. I think for the purposes of this discussion, in my mind, when I'm talking about trying to make sure that Black history is incorporated into American history, is basically saying, I want my kids, if they were to go to any school, to learn more than the things that I outlined at the beginning that I learned. I want them to understand more about voluntary immigration. Why are people coming here from other countries? How have they been treated when they've gotten here? What kind of lives are they able to pursue when they're here? Why is there such a stigma against people of color immigrating here? Things like that. I want those stories to be told too. But when I think about, African American history from the perspective of folks that have been descendants of slaves that were brought here, I'm thinking that story in particular is one that needs to be taught as part of American history because it is inextricably linked to American history. It isn't just Black history. That particular line of history is the backbone and the foundation of America. So to me, I want that story to be told. And as we start expanding the value and the information that we share about those stories that are not told, I think there is room and space for other African American stories that don't hail from that origin. Like, for instance, my own origin story is not the same as Tachi's, but it's also different in that I consider myself a Black woman. I am. That's what the world sees me as. That's how I perceive myself. But I'm just as much white as I am Black. And my American roots are actually white. I'm not an African American in the sense that I can trace my lineage back from the Middle Passages to the United States. I can trace my lineage back through the Middle Passages, but to South America. So I'm not even African American if you want to be technical. I am because I was born here and I'm a Black in America, like Tachi said. So by virtue of that, that makes me African American, but that's not my background or history either. My biological father is from South America. And of course, his ancestors came over in those same boats as the ancestors that most Black Americans can trace themselves back to in West Africa somewhere. But my story is not the same. So, you know, where's my story going to be told? How is it going to be told? So that's the piece that I think until we can kind of get our minds wrapped around the different narratives and the different stories to be told, it's very difficult to find a starting place.
Before I let Tachi jump in, there's a lot of comments going on here, so I'm going to see if I can catch up to them. Ritz Kellogg said his good friend who is Black showed me a while back a school book company that is removing that Black people were slaves and replacing it. There we have it, and that they were immigrants. Well, certain politicians are saying that too, but we won't go there.
It was happening in Texas, that change in the curriculum.
Yeah, so they're having that in the curriculum. He said he showed me a YouTube video this a couple of years ago. They're trying to erase, have been gone. Okay, so I just wanted to catch up with that. And what you're saying, Leah, is so true, is that what story do you start with? Or I think we should just start and make sure we include as many as possible. Tachi, I'll let you continue because I know you have something to say.
I agree.
Okay, so we've spent some time talking about what's been going on in the Black, I'll say, environment when it comes to this. Now let's turn it to how do we get it out in the broader educational curriculum? How do we do that? What's a game plan for that?
I think, if you don't mind me starting, Leah,
Go.
I think that there needs to be levels of this is a multi-tiered issue and a multi-tiered problem to tackle. When you don't have people who care about this at the decision-making level, that really significantly impacts whether or not this is included when you talk about curriculum and instruction. So one, on the basic simplest level, which is really not that simple, is to make sure that there are more people, and I'm not just saying Black, I'm saying people who care about making sure that the whole story is told, that they are in the upper rungs of the decision-making process so that this happens. Part of the thing now is when you have people at the helm who don't really care or who don't see it as important, this is what you end up with. So you need people who are dedicated to seeing that happen to enact it, to make sure that that happens. B, I think there also needs, besides being in the thick of it, in the administrative level of it, also the community has to want it. If there is enough community pressure, we've seen pressure for in other things. Just look at this damn thing with the blackface sweater and Gucci.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Yeah.
All that needs to happen is for Black Twitter to drag them before they apologize and do something. If we have that kind of power with a damn blackface sweater, imagine what we could do if we were really serious about saying, look, I'm tired of my child being taught half of the story. This needs to happen, and it needs to happen now, or we will make your lives miserable. We'll make people's lives miserable over these other things, but we won't do it when it comes to where it really counts and matters. And I'm not saying that doesn't matter, but this is critical to preventing those types of things.
So before you jump in, Leah, isn't it concerning how much pushback happened in regard to the Gucci, but there's not as much pushback from my point anyways, maybe I'm different, that maybe I'm living in a bubble in regards to this subject getting more of our history in the curriculum? Why isn't there more push?
In my opinion, it's an easy thing. It's so easy to react. It's harder to proact. So in the case of doing, what it would take to incorporate more Black history into general educational curriculum requires action. It's going to take time and dedication. And as I was saying earlier, I think that's something that is at a premium these days. I think the daily lives of Americans, and I'm sure it's the same in Canada, is at the point now where people don't have any free time. They're just caught up in their daily survival, whether they're parents or not, whether you're single or married in a relationship. I think people are just so overwhelmed with living their daily lives that it's very hard to carve out the time and space that you would really need to do what it would take or what it would require to get the curriculum together. Now, that's not to say that it's impossible. If it's somebody's passion and they really want to do it, it's going to get done. But I don't feel like, responding on Twitter or doing a Twitter rant because you saw some BS that Gucci put out, it's easy. I can do that in 2 seconds. There's no investment. But this is something that's long-term. It's going to take time. It's something that needs to be well thought out and planned. You have to have the right people in the room. And I just think people are unwilling or less willing or reluctant to invest or give of themselves in that way to do it, which is why it ends up happening, as we've said, kind of piecemeal, like at an individual familial level. Like, for instance, in my case, I already told you, as a mother, I'm involved at my children's school, at home. Throughout the year, we are constantly looking at YouTube videos about Black History Month, learning about different African American or Black leaders, because we also don't, in my family, because we're so internationalized, we don't just relegate it to the United States. So we are looking at African leaders, African movements. I'm trying to teach my kids that Africa is not just one place, that it's actually many, many different cultures that are in a variety of different countries, because that is a pet peeve of mine, and that everyone is like, oh, Africa, like it's one single place. Like, there's so many differences between one country, even within one country and the next, that it upsets me. But we're trying to teach our kids those fine, distinctions. We're teaching them what the African diaspora is, but that's just in our home. So it just comes down to individual.
Absolutely. Teach your kids the difference between Ghana jollof rice and Nigeria. Just saying.
Yeah, we're already starting that. We need y'all to come and bring us the samples, though, because we're going to need to do a taste test.
Oh, no problem.
Because we've already heard about these battles.
No problem.
Yeah. And the shea butters, too. We've been trying to figure out which country produces the better shea.
It's Ghana.
So that's what we've heard. That's what we've seen.
Ghana.
Okay.
But
the jollof is y'all, right?
I just want to shout out Stephanie on Periscope and Peekaboo on Periscope also. I appreciate what you say, Leah, but my concern is what happens if the situation doesn't change? What does that mean for Black's future if the situation doesn't change? And I'll let Tachi start off on that.
Okay. Then we just keep going business as usual. And that just is an indication that we're okay with where things are, which we know we're not. There is, as Leah was saying, the time and investment to solve something like this is quite a bit. But this is why, we're not asking for the entire community to all write curriculum and all. No, that's why there are people who specialize in these things. And I'm sorry, it's an investment. So if we're serious about this, first of all, anybody who does not want to contribute to that should have nothing to say about the state of education. And why aren't I? Because there are all sorts of people who have all sorts of things about why aren't doing anything. I'm sorry. If you're not doing anything, no matter how small, whether it's supporting other people who want to do it or whatever, then you have nothing to say. Sit down and have some toast. Okay. But
avocado toast.
Sit down and eat your avocado toast, exactly, with the millennials. Okay, eat the avocado toast. So, but it's a multifaceted problem, as I've kept saying, and it does take a lot, but we just have to invest. So if that means raising funds to pay the people to write the curriculum, the people who would do this, then so be it. But that's what we actually have to look at. And guess what? This is why we have organizations that are advocacy organizations that, in my opinion, probably need to change their focus, because they've been doing the same thing for donkey's years. So they need to change the focus to education. I won't name these organizations, but I think we can all guess what they are.
Huh.
Um,
Is one of
so
them have 5 letters in it?
yes, and it runs
Okay.
with Run
No, no.
DMC. I'm sorry.
Oh, you went there.
Well,
You and
I
I were
went
thinking
there. I went there because I used to be the president of a branch of this when I was in college, and I saw firsthand how sometimes antiquated methods and thought processes were. And I'm not just pointing fingers at them. This is with a lot of our organizations, and we have to stop it. We cannot rest on the laurels of what we used to do back in the civil rights days or back when we were founded. What needs to happen is moving forward. This is our agenda now. This is what is not changing. This is what we need to do. Very simple.
Encyclopedia Brown, want to add?
Yes, I'll just add very briefly.
Before you go
Yes,
further,
go ahead.
Natalie Crew goes, the national advancement of antiquated bougie Black folks.
Well, preach. Yes.
Natalie Crew, keep on bringing it. Okay.
Okay, all I was going to add is that in addition to I'll just say the long-term organizations that have been around for a long time and have their own way of doing things, whether or not those things or those ways are antiquated or not, I do think hope lies in newer organizations and newer institutions that are, working to infuse things on a different level. I want to kind of put in a plug for one organization that I think is getting a lot more buzz these days, and it's called Urban Intellectuals.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have heard of them or seen them.
Yes.
They're all over Facebook. Here, I'll just let me see if I can type it into the chat box.
That'd be great for our audience, please.
Yeah, let me just. So I don't know if that's correct, but you guys can Google it. Urban Intellectuals. But basically what they're trying to do is exactly what we are discussing this evening, is to raise the level of educational resources out there that schools or school districts can pick up the curriculum and incorporate into existing curriculum for them, among other things. I think one of their main visions is that they want to raise the profile of Black Americans, period, in the I guess in the global eye, but especially in the society, broader society, to see the contributions that Black people make, to see us as more than the stereotypes that they're taught to believe about us. And they do this through a variety of things. And one is just helping us to educate ourselves. So for instance, they offer a line of cards that basically are 50 African-American leaders in STEM, 50 African-American females that you may not be aware of beyond the Rosa Parkses of the world, even though I'm sure she's included. But there's so many other stories that even we don't know about ourselves. And that is what they're trying to do. They also have a series of trivia cards so people can start to quiz themselves on their own Black history and their own knowledge. And I think as things like that start to become more widespread, or people pick them up, then there's going to be a general base level of knowledge that's there. And I noticed in the comments on the side that Melvin was saying a lot of this information is already out there. And that is true. The difference is, and where I think we need to go, is to not just have it be out there kind of in dribs and drabs and in pieces. We need something or some way to bring all of it together and to aggregate the information and put it into an actual curriculum. And with that curriculum, that is what you can give to schools and school districts to kind of infuse whatever they're teaching about American history with more facts that relate to the Black experience.
Okay, so I'm just going to jump in here. Natalie Cruz says on Periscope, it takes a village, but we need to hold all of these organizations accountable before we get down to work, from Black Lives Matter to the NAACP. She also highlights hashtag hip hop ed, which is a great resource online. And I remember many, many years ago when it was just starting, I had a chance to have Christopher Edmond on the Dr. Vibe show doing great, great stuff. Melvin is saying, as a former educator, it's like pulling hen's teeth to get many kids to even register for African American history classes. And that's where I was gonna, he's reading my mind, that our young people, are they wanting the knowledge? Do they care about the knowledge? And if they aren't, how can that be turned around?
Make it mandatory, like what they're saying. I feel like it should be one of those things where I remember, in order to get my Regents diploma in New York State, for example, and Tachi can relate to this, and I think California has a similar program. I think, in fact, those are the only two states that have the Regents type program for a high school diploma. but there's a certain core curriculum that every student, I know Regents, exactly, Dre, you would know too, being from New York, but basically there are certain core requirements, core courses that every student who wants to get a Regents diploma must take. So, and most kids want the Regents diploma because it's the better degree. It's supposed to be, you know, a bit more prestigious than a general diploma. So this is a perfect opportunity of, they need to put in one African American studies class, one gender studies class, one blah, blah, blah class, and make the kids take the class. Period. Don't let it be a choice. Just let them figure out when they want to take it, which semester or what time of day, but make sure it's something that they must take. And that comes from parents and broader society putting pressure on the school board, putting pressure on the departments of education to include that as a that's the only way I can see it really happening in a widespread way.
So do you, again, though, I'm remembering what you said earlier about everyone just looking to surviving. Do you think our the Black parent wants this in their schools?
Yes. There's a difference between wanting something and doing something about it. So I think parents can want it, and I'm sure that they do. Most parents probably want it, but the difference, you know, or the line between wanting it and actually being able to do something about it or having the time to do something about it so that it can be implemented is a different thing. But yes, I wouldn't say all parents, but I would say that there are many that would like to see something like that. And not only Black parents. I know a lot of my white friends have also said that this information is important. They want their kids to know this stuff. They want to make sure that they are getting the full picture of America, because it isn't just to benefit African Americans to know more about our own history. If it's American history, then all Americans should be taught about it. All of them should be educated. Okay. So, yeah.
So, Tachi, anything you want to add on with on
Well,
that?
absolutely. How despicable does it? I mean, you just have to look at yourselves as a country, or we have to look at ourselves as a country and say, how despicable is it that you have a whole, and it's not just with African American history or African history or, you know, Black history. This is with other histories as well. However, we happen to be speaking about Black history today, so that's what I'll tailor it to. How despicable is it that you're missing a whole half of your history, and you say you're giving students complete education? That's a lie. That's a lie. Mm-hmm. They're getting half of the story. And so this is, why do you think that when so many Black students go to college, they become woke and they get this epiphany, they start reading these mm-hmm. books and they're making up for the lost time that they were not taught. And how terrible is that? That means you are failing them. You are failing them. If they have to play catch up when they get to college and read through the list of books to get to what they should have already had, for the most part, you're failing them, and you ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Yeah, I agree. And that person that Tachi just described was me. Because, I mean, for those that were on earlier, I mean, I grew up without this opportunity, without these resources, without those people around me. So at least I was woke enough as a new graduate of high school going into college to know that I wanted this knowledge. So I sought it out. And I became an African American studies major for myself. And it was one of my majors. I had more than one major in undergrad because that major was for me.
So Leah, let me ask you something. What made you want to seek it out?
I just think because my whole life, it had been an absence. I mean, it was a huge vacuum in my life where, you know, I'm walking around as this Black woman in a completely white world. Not only when I was out at school or in the streets, but when I would come home through my front door, I was still surrounded by white people. And so for me, I was acutely and hyper aware of my difference. And also, and thankfully, by some grace of God, that was never a problem for me because I was always comfortable in my own skin. But where it was a problem for me was I didn't even know my own story. And unfortunately, the people that I was around were not in a position to teach me that story, even if they wanted to. And all they could do was bring me a book, introduce me to another, you know, Black colleague or friend of theirs that I could talk to and ask my questions to. And I did have an African-American female who was kind of a mentor to me when I was in high school, because my mother realized her own shortcomings, which God bless her for it. And she encouraged me to seek out these kind of relationships, but they could not teach me what they themselves don't know and what they have not experienced. So for me, I had to seek it out on my own, and I really, really wanted to. And I think because a piece of me, even as a child, knew that I didn't want my children to experience that. I didn't want them to feel that not knowing my story. Where am I from? Who are my people? What are my roots? It's got to be more than slavery. It just has to be, and I just was like, I'm tired of hearing about Martin Luther King. No disrespect, but as a teenager, I was just like, there's more to the civil rights movement than him and Rosa Parks. So I just felt like, you know what, if I want to know these things, I'm going to have to learn it for myself. And that is exactly what I did. And as a freshman, I decided that I was going to start taking African American studies classes. And so I did. And now I'm at a point where my kids are never going to have to experience that. They're going to go through some whatever drama, because there's always going to be something. There's no perfect parenting, and there's no guidebook. But at least they're not going to have to go through that same trial that I did, because I learned the lesson. And so I'm making sure that they don't have that. And so I feel like that's what made me have that motivation.
May I?
Leah, thank you. No, Leah, that was outstanding. Like Encyclopedia Brown, like you, boom, boom.
You're welcome.
Tachi,
Yeah,
that was great. Like, wow.
Absolutely, absolutely. Here's the thing. We also have to hold ourselves accountable and responsible for not telling these stories. So granted, we know about the MLKs and the Rosa Parks because that's what they deem necessary for us to know. But then we also have, so for all intents and purposes, I live in the South, simply because this is now, more of an immigrant feel, doesn't mean that South Florida is not the South. It is. And so there are all these stories of people that grew up here, not necessarily always in South Florida, but a lot of people that grew up in South Florida or that live in South Florida now that are Black, a lot of them came from North Florida and came from Georgia because of, agriculture. So there are these stories as well. And I remember, I don't know if I ever told this, but one of my my line sisters, her parents are like my parents basically. And her father told the story of, worked for the county and stuff, had a high position. And they said to him one day, there's a warrant out for your arrest. He was like, what? It was an old warrant from when he was integrating the lunch counters in North Carolina in Greensboro. He was not one of the Greensboro boys, but he protested with them. And he went to North Carolina A&T, and he spent 2 weeks in jail. And he said, yeah, they gave us bologna and white bread, and it was terrible. But the whole thing is like, do you realize you're living history? Where is this documented? Exactly. So I understand that we tend to be an oral culture, but we also do a very poor job of documenting these things.
That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why I've done these epic conversations for 10 years, because God willing, I'm not going to drop dead tomorrow. But if I do, something's here.
Yeah. And
it's interesting you mentioned that story, because a number of years ago, I had a chance through a mutual friend to sit down with a gentleman who either opened up or was one of the original staff of a restaurant in Toronto called the Underground Railroad. And I think it's back in the 1950s. It was I believe it was Toronto's first fully owned Black restaurant.
Wow.
And we were sitting down chatting and just phenomenal stuff. And he had this satchel bag and he said, hey, I want to show you something. And he brought out an original menu from that restaurant. So I agree that documenting the history is so, so important, because another thing I always say is we have to control our narrative.
Absolutely.
We do.
I think in part of getting it the education, we have to make sure it's getting our people, whether it's our elders, our community, our whoever, to tell those stories, because once those people are gone, the stories are gone.
Yeah. And in addition to that, too, once those people are gone, the stories are gone. But also, as we discussed earlier, and many people mentioned, they're changing our story. I mean, if they're trying to write in textbooks that slavery in the Middle Passages was a wave of immigration, come on. I mean, we have got to make sure that we are telling our own stories for ourselves at a minimum to fact check the record. So that so as Tachi said earlier, we're not just completely erased or that our narrative is written for us to fulfill whatever political purposes exist for the current leadership, but also to make sure that at a minimum it's accurate. It might be ugly, but we still need to know it.
Absolutely.
Period. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, and we've got to make sure that we do that for ourselves because it doesn't benefit anybody else to do that. So the onus is on us.
Absolutely.
Greetings, Steph. I think one of the many amazing things that have happened through this conversation is that both of the Black Lady Magic here have the same month birthday. And
I think that Tati is secretly my sister, and maybe she needs to have a conversation with her father because, I mean, upstate New York. Now, come on, you know, there's only a couple years between us. My biological father, I really don't know him, so you know,
I know
there's too much in common here. There's too much in common, you know.
Right?
I'm just saying, you know, maybe have a little offline conversation with Pops.
I know, right?
And,
you know,
and then, what are the odds of having another person named Leah in the audience? And
she's biracial like me.
Yeah, I'm just
another biracial Leah. Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. So this is what makes the conversations
epic. It's magic. It's truly magic.
Good evening, Steph. Hope all is going fine with you. You know, these are the things that we have to do, and if we want Black history and Black contributions out in the wider education community, we got to start with our own family. We got to start. We got to start where we're at. We have to start where we're at, and I've mentioned periodically at times, and some people may or may not know. I've shared once in a while. My dad went to Howard University, and one of his professors was Toni Morrison.
Oh my God, your dad is so lucky.
I'm going, and I didn't find that out till a few years ago, but now I'm making a point to find out his journey and all the different people that he's encountered, and because I'm not going to see it on TV. Heck no, I ain't going to see it on TV or in the media. And if I do, I know it potentially is a different version than the real version of someone who lived it.
See, and that is and this is a whole other conversation, but to me, that is the value of having HBCUs. And we understand not everybody is going to go to an HBCU. You have to go to the institution that fits you. I understand that. But there is something to be said about, of course, for those of you who don't know, I also went to Howard University. All my graduate work was there. And there's something to be said about walking the same paths that Dr. Charles Drew walked, that Elaine Locke walked, that seeing Al Freeman Jr. hanging up a sign for auditions, being in my department, and at one point Bill Duke was faculty there, being there and also seeing Ossie Davis. There is something powerful about having that living history. So the thing about Howard University and all HBCUs is that Black people are their mission. So while you learn about the larger society in general, you also recognize your place in the world and your importance in the world. And so that, if you take that spirit and you put it on a smaller level in the curriculum, that's a powerful thing. When you look at Howard, and you probably look at your father this way, Howard, Spelman, Morehouse, all these people, you can't tell us anything. We walk into a room, I'm sorry, don't you know I went to Howard University? You can't tell us anything, because there's that level of pride that is instilled in you for being who you are. That's what we need to have on a K through 12 level.
Right. And so Steph saying is her stepdad graduated from Howard, and he went to high school with Debbie Allen and Felicia Rashad.
See?
So cool.
Wow.
And then she's saying, and his father was the first licensed veterinarian in Texas and a Tuskegee graduate.
Wow. And see, that's powerful, because again, there are those of us, okay, I can't imagine people not knowing Howard University or any of these ages, but there are people who don't. I remember when I was graduating from University of Buffalo, and I was going to graduate school, and people asked where you go. Oh, Howard. A lot of people knew where it was. There were a lot of non-melanated people who, oh no, I don't know Howard. How do you not know Howard yet? I'm required to know Harvard and all these other things.
So
yeah, exactly. So why I know that you know the most obscure PWI, but you don't know Tougaloo College and these things like that. So again, that's a problem, because these things are not included in fact, some of these schools could be down the street from where you are, but you don't know. So that's a huge problem. This is American history. The fact that there was a time when you couldn't go to anybody's college, so this is why these colleges sprang up. Why would you not know that? So again, I'll go back to the fact that I am tired of the incomplete story. That's why I'm so glad you brought this up, because Leah, because this is critically important.
Yep.
Wow. Ladies, I think we're going to start shutting it down as more and more people. Isn't it always with our conversations?
Yeah, it just gets going.
Absolutely.
But these ladies have had long, positive, productive days. And Tachi had a conversation earlier on. And I know Leah has the world of Armenian.
Yes. And I have some news to share with you guys, but off afterwards. So we got to wrap it up. So I can tell you.
And Dre is saying Howard is a hidden gem and shouldn't be. I have a friend, white, chose Howard to get his degree in dentistry because of its amazing reputation.
Well, it's got a great reputation, but in Maryland, DC, Maryland, Virginia, there are only 2 dental schools, a University of Maryland and Howard University. And Howard is exactly. So when you look at Howard is an HBCU, but it's hugely international. In fact, I had a class where in Mass Comm where I was the only Black person and everybody else was Arab. So Howard draws an international contingency of people. So when we talk about HBCUs, it's not just about educating Black students. It's about educating world leaders, regardless of ethnicity and race.
Melvin is saying, Tachi, that's why I try to tell Black athletes that brag about the Alabamas. Those are dependents of those that went to HBCUs.
Preach, teach, reach, and church, Melvin. Exactly. You're at Alabama because somebody went to a Tuskegee.
Exactly.
So Steph is saying, I took a tour of HBCUs when I was 15. It was a week-long trip, so eye-opening. Very nice. Very, very nice. Imagine they would play HBCUs, the NCAA basketball and football programs would be up in arms.
That'd be awesome. I would love to see that.
The Final Four would all be HBCUs, Dre says.
That'd be awesome.
I would not doubt that. Well, folks, we are going to wind it up on another epic conversation. As always, Black Lady Magic is on fire. And I'd like to have them give closing comments and where they can be reached. So, Dr. Tachi, you first.
Thank you again for having me. I always feel so honored that I'm able to spend time with the both of you. So thank you. And Leah, thank you for bringing up this critically important topic. And it's a constant conversation, but not just conversation. It has to be constant action. So whereas we may not be able to do anything now on a larger scale, we need to continue to pressure, school systems and people who are in charge to make sure there is inclusion in all aspects in the curriculum. And then we need to do what we can do to make sure that our children are getting it. If they can't get it in the school system, that they need to get it outside of that. And we need to be sure, because again, if you don't have a sense of self, that's where this lost feeling comes from. So knowing your history and understanding that you come from greatness and sometimes not greatness, that you have a history like everybody else, ensures that you are able to do things because you have a sense of self. So you can reach me. I am on Twitter at Tachiada, TACHIADA. I do, because Dr. Vibe will get me if I don't say this, I do a conversation. I have a show called Media Scope, where I talk about media, tech, and pop culture every Wednesday at 6 p.m. on Periscope and Facebook Live. The pre-show is at 5 on Instagram Live, at Mediascope 16 on Facebook and Tatiana on Periscope and Twitter. And I'm also one half of the TV Twins. TV Channeling is a podcast on every major podcasting platform. You can go to tvchanneling.com and get it that way. And coming up, we've got a really interesting conversation with a person who is has been a producer on almost every reality television show. If you watch it, he's produced it. So.
Wow. That is large.
That's cool.
Encyclopedia Brown, your turn.
So I put my stuff in the chat, but I'll say it again for those that may not have access to the chat. But my final thought is just that I brought this topic up because it's something that's very close to my heart, not only because of my upbringing, but now especially as a mother of 2 kids going through elementary school and just sort of the state of education in general today and the gaps that I see existing. I'm also married to an educator. And so I hear from him sort of, the perspective of teachers and the expectation that teachers have to kind of fill the gap too. But I'm like, they're expected to do so much. So now you expect them to also introduce and write and create new curriculum as well. It's just too much. So for me, my little way of making a difference is to talk about it. We need, like Dr. Vibe was saying earlier, we need to start where we are, start with each other. It starts with us. So we need to keep having these conversations, and we need to take these conversations beyond us, because clearly we're all on the same page here. We know that it's important, but we need to talk to other people who might be in a position to take things to the next level if this is really, truly a value and a priority that we want to address. So, and like Tachi said, it is an honor and a privilege for me as well to be here with you guys. I really enjoy this time. I really appreciate the conversations that we get to have, and it's an opportunity for me to be unapologetically Black, and I can't always be that way in my daily life. So I appreciate just this free space. So I really appreciate you guys showing up and being here with us to have these conversations. In terms of keeping up with me in between these conversations, you can find me pretty much across the internet on Aliyah World Traveler. That's LIA World Traveler. The blog is leahworldtraveler.com. It's the same on Facebook and Instagram, and on Twitter, I'm at Aliyah World Travels with an S. I'm also a staff writer for the Black Urban Travel magazine, Griot's Republic. I'm also the co-CEO of Peace and Purpose, which is a catalyst social enterprise, basically trying to help female entrepreneurs of color in the developing and underdeveloped world break their markets into the US and Canadian markets. More to come on that. We're doing something very exciting with an established company soon. So we're going to kind of do our official launch, and we got some fire products that you will love. And I have some other exciting news that I'll say for probably another week from now, but I'm basically going to be doing some big things with another big company and have an important role. And I'm writing a lot. So actually in the spirit of Black History Month, I just wrote another piece about Black Wall Street. So that topic is of infinite fascination to me, and I would love to talk about it. I'll try to link to it later on if I can. I'll try to find the link right now before we wrap up so you can read it. It's super fascinating, and I'd love to know your thoughts on it.
Well, that's fantastic. When you talk about Black Wall Street, I'm actually going to send you a link. A number of years ago, I had an epic conversation with for the first time the gentleman was on, named Henri Morris. And he spoke about an hour and a half about Black Wall Street. Long before everyone now is talking about it. He, I'll be totally transparent, I didn't know much about Black Wall Street.
Most people don't.
Yeah, and I just got blown away. And he's been a regular contributor to the Dr. Vibe show since that, and that's 6 years ago.
That's amazing.
So,
but yeah, Black Wall Street is another example of erased history, and them taking away our narrative. So that's why I wrote the article, because more people know about it now, but it's still not known in the way that it should be, because it was never really, it was intentionally omitted from the history books. It's not taught. It's not in the curriculum. It's not in the state, register in Oklahoma. It's nowhere. So I'm saying, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just wanted to say that. It was an intentional omission. It was intentional.
It's everyone's conversation. So before we sign off, I'll just like to thank a whole pile of you. So there's Badges, there's So Steph, there's the other Leah. And a while back I got you both confused, but there are now 2 separate Leahs. So I got that.
Yeah.
There you go. Ritz Kellogg, Melvin Lars, Roger Dundas, Luke, Dre, Curtis. Thank you so much. Let me just check if anyone else. The Hello Room, thank you very much. Of course, can't forget Natalie Crew. Can't forget you for sight. Uh, yeah, that I think. And if I've let you out, as I say now, it's because of my head. It's not because of my heart. So that's what I use if I don't get everyone, because there was just things, so much going on. I am always blessed and highly favored to have these two epic Black lady thought leaders on the platform. They make me better. I look forward to our conversations. When I don't have them, I'm not the same. So
Aw.
please, no, do me a favor, everyone. If it's in your heart, follow and support them.
Oh, thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Please, very, very, very much do that, because they are epic in their own right. They don't need me anymore. They're more than epic in their own right. I will say, I'll keep it really short. The best way to touch base with me, and I put it in the chat on the side, is just go to my website, thedrvibeshow.com. All my social media information is on there. I don't want to tell you all this stuff because I'll probably forget some of it. That is that. My next conversation is actually going to be co-hosting with a gentleman that's on here, Melvin Lars. And
Yay.
so yes, so on the 22nd, this Friday, I believe we're doing it at 5 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Eastern. He's asked me to co-host a conversation with a gentleman named Donnie Little, the first African American quarterback to play, start, and lead another number one ranking football team in the United States.
Mm.
Wow.
So yes, so this is going to be huge as always. So I thank Melvin for allowing me to be part of this conversation. That's basically it, folks. As I like to say, a few last things. Live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Next up, sometimes you have to get smaller to get stronger. Block assumptions, and then aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. I'd like to thank everyone for jumping in tonight. And my next conversation that I'll be hosting next Monday night with LaRon Barton, talking about Black boys that are sexually abused.
Oh, wow.
He wrote an article on that, and follow me whatever you are, whether it's on Get Vocal or on Twitter. That is going to be a huge conversation. And a few weeks after that, or a week after that, Serena Wills is going to be talking about taking care of the elderly.
Oh,
Mm.
And that is a
okay.
subject that maybe some of you have experienced, but I have a feeling that most of us will sooner rather than later. Yes.
Yeah, we will.
So, as always, I'd like to say you're blessed and highly favored. You're a magnet for miracles, and you're a solution for someone's problem. God bless. Peace to you well. Keep the faith and walk good. Good night, everybody. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.